So the organization of LOA is in part to maintain a facility, but also in part to engender a group of partnerships, a kind of a collaborative space in which we can advance scholarship, but query the nature of scholarship and understand what our obligations are as researchers to history in this part of the world and to Indigenous history particularly. LOA stands for the Laboratory of Archaeology, and it's an entity, a unit here at the University of British Columbia that was established in 1949 by Charles Borden, who was a professor of German but had a vocational interest in archaeology and became a founding figure in archaeological history as part of his work across this landscape, which he formed a specific partnership with Musqueam. In his excavation and his work, he curated a large number of belongings that came from archaeological sites, Indigenous archaeological sites in the vicinity. And as a result, he started collecting them and curating them in a more formal setting and analyzing them, and so he forged the Laboratory of Archaeology, which was a pet project for a while. He was also the architect of the Heritage Conservation Act, along with his student Wilson Duff. And in that piece of legislation, they defined something called a repository, which is a legal entity that curates belongings that have heritage value for the people of British Columbia. And in our context, it's mostly Indigenous peoples for whom we are the stewards of these belongings. And so LOA has this history as a research enterprise. Today, it represents really three separate things that are interwoven. Firstly, it's a research facility that has a number of laboratories where we can conduct analyses. Some of the very standard kind of expected ones, we have research spaces, teaching classrooms. We have a lithics analysis space, which allows us to identify stone tools and even manufacture our own experimental sets of stone tools. We have a zooarchaeological or a faunal collections room and a space for studying the animal bones that come out of archaeological sites. We also have an ethnobotanical collection, and so a space that provides us with microscopy as well as an identifying collection that allows us to make sense of things that are found in archaeological contexts. We have a series of microscopy and processing labs that allow us to bring materials in from archaeological collections and process them so that they can be analyzed. But I think perhaps the most dramatic and maybe one of our most impressive laboratory facilities is the isotopic lab, which allows us to do light isotope analysis of organic materials to identify patterns in isotopic signatures in organic animal bones and plant materials and other kinds of tissues to better understand the history, the biography, the location, and the diet of organisms. So this is quite an advanced facility, one of the few that exist in Canada, and it is part of, I think, our future expansion. The second thing then that LOA is a community of scholars, and that includes the academic scholars that come from the Department of Anthropology, also from classical, Near Eastern, and religious studies, and we have staff and undergraduate students, graduate students, and postdoctoral fellows, all part of our sort of internal UBC community, a group of very highly qualified personnel that allow our facilities to operate and our responsibilities to be maintained and our educational programs to work. But it's also a broader community. It extends to the descent communities of the people whose heritage we curate, and that includes communities such as Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and others, and Stolo, others in the sort of the vicinity within which UBC's sort of physical space occupies. So that our concept of a research community extends beyond the boundaries of what is the University of British Columbia and into these other arenas. It includes visiting scholars from institutions, but also from communities beyond our borders. So we have a broad net as a community of scholars. And then the third thing the LOA is a repository. That is this legal entity that curates for the people of British Columbia the material heritage of its past. And since the archaeologists at LOA have primarily focused on Indigenous history, and of that primarily on Musqueam history, our repository obligations are largely to the Indigenous communities with whom we have worked and on whose territory we have conducted research.